it's getting pretty nice in here now. The bunker I've set up. I haven't got deep supplies, but maybe I don't need them. Well, I don't know. I'm joined today by David from the 30K channel. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm very well, Rob. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity. It's awesome.
No, it's an opportunity to have you on. You look amazing. You've got the t-shirt, the backdrop. Uh, People can see. You actually embarrassed me. I actually just quickly put the headphones down to just close the bin at the back that people could see. So
Oh,
way more professional. Yes, so much pro. Already getting love from the people in the chat.
oh,
Welcome. So, hello to everyone who's watching us live, whether that be Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, weirdly. Still freaks me out. But thank you for joining us live. If you do join us live, thanks for saying hi in the chat. Make sure you do. And ask any questions that you want to ask. If you listen to the podcast, please stay hydrated, drink all your water, stay healthy. And thank you to everyone on the Honest War Gamer Patreon. So, David here today is going to be talking about the Horus Heresy. But before we do that, we're going to get to find out more about him.
oh,
How are you? First question. How are you doing at the minute?
oh, man, I'm doing well. I have changed my schedule recently. In the last sort of 6 months or so, I now have a Wednesday off during the week, which is amazing. So Wednesday is my time to get new content on the channel and prepare for when we're filming battle reports on the weekend. Wednesday's my time to prep everything, get the board built, get everything sorted. The channel's evolved now, and there's so much more involved than there was maybe 2 years ago, and it's a huge draw on my time. So Wednesdays are amazing. It allows me to get stuff done. But
That doesn't sound
uh,
like a day off. As a
oh
self-employed person who completely understands what you mean, other people
yes,
at home will be like, "That doesn't sound like a day off."
you know, I hate to be a cliche, I absolutely hate it. But you know, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. Oh, it's such a cringy cliche, but it's so true. I used to have quite a good job, earning a reasonable salary and lots of benefits and stuff, and I loved it, and I got all over the place. But this doing this is unparalleled, and I just absolutely love it. And I hope that comes through in the videos that the channel produces, and hopefully that comes across. But
I think
no,
it
it's cool.
does. I think it absolutely does, and I mirror that sentiment as well. I really enjoy what I do. And like when we do live coverage at the weekend, sometimes they're like 12, 14-hour days back to back, and you're
Mm.
like, why am I doing this? But actually, because it's just great fun. And you're right. Yeah, if you love what you're doing, it's not as hard. Virulent in the chat says he looks so passionate, it makes me want to cry.
Oh, I
Perfect.
cry a lot.
So thank you to everyone for joining us live. Well, I'm glad you're doing well. You changed the schedule around because you're locked in, right? Like, is your studio at home, so you're able to do the stuff from there, or is it somewhere else and you like go between the two, which is fine if you're on your own, right?
Yeah, it used to be all right. I used to be based out of a unit in Peterborough, and then I moved to another place closer to home, which is near Huntingdon. But I'll be honest with you, rent got too much, and any money the channel was making was basically going back into rent, which is heartbreaking. If you want to progress and produce different stuff, and I felt that the channel was going well, but it was just producing bat reports all the time. And I know that's where the focus of the channel is, but I want to do more and I want to do other stuff. So to do that, you need a bit of cash. So about 5 months ago, maybe I moved it to the house that my girlfriend and I are living in. I took over a garage, a part in the living room, a spare room for my hobby room, and then the second bedroom as where we film the battle reports. So it's got loads of lighting rigs and a table, everything in here, um, and that saving on rent allows me to plow money into models, new equipment, and essentially everything I make goes back into the channel because that's really, really important.
Well, so
Um,
because as a bat repper, straight off the bat, something I never wanted to do was bat reps. I think they're super valuable and done really well by yourself and others for different game systems. And
yeah,
already I was like, well, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and do any better than these people. So just let them fucking do their thing well, which I think you do. But also, like you're like, I've got to buy a fucking lot of models and build and paint them, and then add into that you have to buy Forge World models, which
yeah.
are percentage even more expensive, right? So there's a lot of cost in just doing that people don't see, I guess.
There is, but see, this is where I was. I'm going to say clever. I don't know if I'm clever or not, but I knew that perhaps I wouldn't be able to afford that, because if you're going to cover every legion and all the offshoots of that, so Mechanicum, multiple builds, there's Solar Auxilia, Black Shields, there's loads of other offshoots. You've got the Talons of the Emperor to cover. There's no way in hell that I would ever be able to purchase 3K of every legion and produce games with myself and a co-host, for example. There was no way that was going to happen. But also as well, nobody wants to listen to me every Friday producing a battle report, which I knew that, right? So I figured, Heresy is full of the most amazing creative people, as well as 40K. It's not limited Heresy, of course, but the hobby that we're in, rather, I should say, is just full of creative and really great people, and they want to share their hobby. And I guess the channel is a vehicle for other people to share the hobby. It's just not me and my mate producing games. It's the community producing games, and I give them a vehicle to do that. So that allowed the channel to have all the legions, all of the armies. We're still missing a few, but it allowed me to share their hobby with the community. And therefore, I think it makes it a little bit more inclusive. That, however, does bring a huge amount of stress. You've got cancellations, people have got their own lives. I get that, and their last instinct is their last thought is to produce battle reports. So I get that, but so far it's worked. But it is tough.
I really like that. I actually like, not to point any fingers, but the concept of a group of people making it on their own somewhere in Canada, and then a whole bunch of getting all the rules wrong. Anyway, a whole group of people doing that, and then as opposed to the community being, super lucky. Obviously, you and I both located in England. I'm right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the ability, obviously, we've got a large group of hobbyists here, which is great. So those people can come and travel. But you're right, organising people, the worst job you can ever have in the world. So I don't envy you in any way, shape, or form. But I like the idea that you're including the community. That's why I decided to go out and do live coverage, because I go into the community and do that process. It's not the same quality as what you do, but it's also a different beast, which is exciting. And I really like it. I just want to say a couple of things in here. Horseman in the chat says Heresy is amazing. Chris Gibson also says, I can honestly say I've had some of the best games of Heresy on the channel, talking about 30.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
It's just the best setting for it. And Luke David Jordan says he really likes Horus, which is,
he does, yeah. he's got a great Sons of Horus army, Luke has. So he's lucky guy. He's got a great army, and Chris as well. Chris is a big Alpha Legion player, and Chris has been on the channel many times, and I'm a big fan of Chris as well. I've been to a few of his events, and he's just a general round nice guy. So thank you so much, guys. Appreciate that.
So we're gonna get to know you first, and then I'm gonna ask you to update us about the Horus Heresy, or give us kind of an introduction into the Horus Heresy. I'm sure you can find all of those things on the channel, and all of the channel all the channels will be linked in the show notes if you listen to the podcast or you're watching it back live. So do that. Apparently you do have intro videos on getting into Heresy already, so we're covering old ground. Just go watch that, but I'm going to ask you anyway. First question though, is when did you get into the hobby? How did you start playing?
Well, it happened years and years ago. I was about 11 or 12, and my friend and I from school at Market Deep in County Primary. Whoop, whoop. Actually, no, it was the Deeping school. Actually, I was at secondary school. So 12, 13, I think. A friend and I went to Games Workshop in Peterborough, and Epic was a thing where you could buy a box set with 500 models in for £5. It was unbelievable. So it started off in Epic pretty much, and I played Epic for a very, very long time, and absolutely loved it. The scale, the drama, and you've got tons of models out, and this is essentially where it brings us into the Heresy now, doesn't it? Because we're playing these epic Titanic games that happened before 40k sort of thing, and Epic was kind of like a precursor set in the Horus Heresy. Well, kind of. It had 40k as well, but a lot of the units were from that. It's a collection of the little goblins, night goblins with the archers and the little spearmen and stuff, and I did a bit of Warhammer, and then with a couple of other friends we did Warhammer quite big, and I loved the square bases and moving stuff around. It was quite cool, and then that just progressed naturally into 40k. Really, there was a little club at school, so did that a few times, and a lot of the friends I had in Market Deeping were well into it, so it kind of spiraled from there really. But the thing I loved about it was that I think it sort of woken a creative side in me that I never really thought I had. I was never really into anything at all really when I was a kid, and it was the thing that I latched onto, and and it's been with me ever since. And that's been through multiple editions of 40k. And then I guess in 2005, I moved out to New Zealand, where I lived there for 7 years, and I collected Necrons, and the Heresy scene in New Zealand. Excuse me, the 40k scene in New Zealand was quite big, to be honest with you. I was really surprised, and had loads of great games and stuff like that. And then I moved back to England 2012, I think 2013, can't remember, and that's where Forge World started releasing Mechanicum models. And for me, the Castellax just struck an absolute chord within me, and I've been pretty much Mechanicum right from 2012 to where we are now. So
I knew I liked
that was
you.
my introduction.
I knew I liked you. I knew that you looked like a man of class and distinguished nature. Yeah, like exactly. You couldn't have said a better thing to have me on your side.
Well, I do remember. I remember meeting you, Rob, when you was at Games Workshop at Nottingham, and you had orange Triaris armored conveyors rammed full of thralls, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. 80 thralls. One of my favourite things ever. Loved it. No one who I played loved it, but I did enjoy watching people stick some Blood Angels fucking champions in there, and I was like, you're just gonna kill dickheads. I don't care. Just you'd be there all day.
Love it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that army, and I'm still pissed that I can't. Well, that's not true. I can play it, but. Yeah, well, that's a really interesting journey. I have a question for you. Would you have considered yourself, or did you consider yourself a narrative gamer, a competitive gamer, mix of both? Like, what was your journey through it?
If I'm perfectly honest, when I was playing 40k in New Zealand, I don't know. When I played 40k, I never subscribed to the ball-busting Death Star list. That was not me. What I loved most was I loved models on the table, and I loved physically moving stuff. And I thought that if the more stuff you have on the board, the more options you have. And my list for 40k for Necrons was, and bear in mind, this was like 4th or 5th edition, and Necrons at the time were really underrated. There was lots of people playing Death Star Eldar with, I don't really know much of the terms from it now, but lots of bikes. I don't what are they called? Seers on bikes, loads of those little seer council, all 3 seer council, all sorts of bits and bobs. But my army consisted of, I think it was 40 Necron warriors, 10 immortals, 2 monoliths, and a couple of tons of scarab swarms and a couple of tomb spiders, and that was pretty much the list. And wraiths, I had some wraiths and lists, but I loved it because there was so much to move and you had so many options. And I think initially I was absolutely a competitive gamer, and I still am. I very much, I love to win. We all love to win, but I love creating weird and wild lists that have got tons of models in that people don't always see. But I am very, very competitive. But playing the Heresy, because it has such a rich history to it, it's hard to ignore. You can't play Heresy and not know the reason why you're playing the game. And I've been consuming audiobooks and reading all the books, and obviously got all the black books as well. And if you play Heresy, you can't be just a competitive gamer. You have to be a narrative gamer as well as a competitive gamer. And I think Heresy mashes those two elements really well together. And then you've also got obviously the gaming, the modeling element, the painting. Heresy for me just meshes all of those beautiful things together and produces a fantastic game. And when you go to events or you watch games on the channel or you go to a club, wherever, armies are generally painted, they're well modelled, they've got a theme behind them. If you play a Death Guard play, you know what you're going to get. If you play an Iron Warrior, you know what you're going to get. Blood Angels, you get Descent of Angels and all that. And it's just really, really cool. Love it.
Yeah, well, I think that you've touched on quite a lot of themes there that I'd like to ask you in more depth about. I think that's one of the things for me. My very first ever Heresy event, I took some knights, and I tell this story a lot when I'm talking about Age of Sigmar or 40k. Some people were like, "You dickhead," and I was like, "I don't know that they're good." I hadn't played any 40k. In fact, actually, really interestingly, my avenue into 40k was by playing 30k first. So I learned 40k rules by playing the Heresy. Because after Age of Sigmar, well, just before Age of Sigmar dropped, I was like, Games Workshop dickheads, but those Forge World guys seem great. Little did I know that they're the same, right? I was like, this Weekender's a laugh. I just go in there. That Tony guy, he's cool. Like, I'm having a great time. So like it was a really good journey through me from there into 40k.
Mm,
But what was interesting is like I took the stuff that I thought was cool, and who doesn't think giant robots are super cool? Um,
absolutely.
but it was at that point that it seemed that they were quite good, and that's always been one of the problems with Games Workshop events and generally events. It doesn't matter which game system you're talking about
Sure.
at all, 40k or Age of Sigmar. Like you've got an event where painting's really important, and you can't win the tournament unless your army's painted really well, or somewhere you've got
Yeah.
to be the best sports to also win the event. It's a hard like every event has always got its foot in two camps sometimes. And the Heresy, it feels like for me, gaming events wise, not like your match with your mate down the pub or like
Yeah.
wherever, but at an event, is it hard to create that environment that like encapsulates those key tenets of what it is? Because to me, it's the most narrative game, and it's also got the best looking armies. We'll talk more about that later, but I
Yeah.
think it's definitely the highest level of hobby in my experience between the three game systems.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to discriminate anyone here, but I guess where that comes from is because generally, and I'm generalizing here, there's always an exception to the rule. I think most players that play Heresy, they are a little bit older than perhaps some of the other game systems, and with that brings a different level of understanding of the game and a shared appreciation for the game. And these guys, they go out, feed their families, pay the mortgage, and their alone time or their time to themselves is they put it into the Heresy, or they put it into painting their army or building lists or going to events. And I think if I look back to when I was a 15, 20, 25-year-old guy in the hobby, it's totally different to now. And I'm 40 this year.
Oh,
It's totally
congrats!
different. Yeah, thank you. Next
You look
month, I
great.
can't wait.
Don't even look it.
So that face cream is what it is. Um, Heresy or gaming now in my 40s or late 30s is so different to when it was when I was a lot younger. And I think when I was younger, I'd walk into Games Workshop and I would just be bewildered by the sheer volume of range. And there's nothing more with range and choice. But I think it's very hard to peg what you want to do, because when you're a kid, or younger rather, you don't know what you want. So you have a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. And before you know it, you've got 5 armies stacked up in boxes and nothing's done with them, and you don't know where to start. Whereas I think with Heresy, because we've had that huge volume of stories and information and all the cool books that go around with it, we've already got an idea in our head about what legion we want. So we go, right, I've limited down to this legion, that legion. I want to be a loyalist or traitorist. It's not Xenos, Space Marines, Tyranids, whatever. There's so many choices in 40k and other game systems, whereas you're either one or the other in Heresy. So that limits you down 50%. And then you kind of go, well, I like Iron Warriors, I like Ultramarines, whatever. And then even then within the legions, you could then go, well, I want tons of Space Marines, or I want just Terminators, or I want an armored column, whatever. But you could start on one route with an armored column and then a year later end up with 50 infantry, and the two will still mesh together really, really well. So I just think Heresy is a different beast. And if you look at the guys and girls that are collecting Heresy, it's more of an involved, invested, purposeful hobby. It's not, oh, I'll have a few of those, and I'll use myself as an example. I started off with Mechanicum. I've gone through various Mechanicum lists, but I've always stayed with Mechanicum. I am branching off now into the Legions for lots of reasons, mainly driven by the channel, but I poured my heart and my soul into Mechanicum, and hopefully that shows through the models and the armies that I've built. But as I said, it's a different beast to other game systems, and it really shows with the age and the maturity. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, to how people approach the hobby.
Yeah, I think that's super valid. I've been to a couple of Horus Heresy weekenders when they were still going, and that's why I don't even know if they are. That's why I'm going to ask you. And then I also went to some Heresy events when they first started out at Warhammer World, which were some of the most fun gaming experiences of my life. Mainly because the hobby was. I met some great friends. My friend Matt, with his night, I met some great dudes, and I had some great games. And also, as a gaming experience, it was really fun for me because actually there is a meta, there is a gaming environment, which if you want to, you can. This was before Custodies, and again, I don't know anything about that process after, but there is and was a very livable gaming environment, but it was rooted in the honesty of the narrative. I always felt like I'm a big fan of this game system,
Sure.
but like I do have some issues which we'll come to later.
Mm.
In that majority, I can't learn 3 game systems, right? Like, and I have to learn 2 very well. So 3 is quite hard for me. Maybe that's just because I'm thick, and I'm all right with
No,
that
I
being.
get you.
I'm all right with that being
I'm the
like
same.
the reason. um, um, a question, something from Nick says, I'm not sure it's different. I think other systems just have more of a range of hobbyists. Maybe that's fair. Maybe that's fair. And
Sure.
but the level of hobby is super high. So for events, would you say that like the process is that it's more narrative, or are there ever competitive events for the Heresy?
And that's really tricky to answer. I have a very, very strong opinion on events, and I
Tell
don't.
me. Tell me.
I don't want to stand on my soapbox for too long.
Do it.
I think in general, the Heresy event scene in the UK is absolutely phenomenal. There are loads of pockets of people all over the country putting on their own unique events, and they are brilliant. Um, and I was thinking about this morning. I think some of the traps that some of the events fall into is that it's really important for events to make themselves stand out from other events. So an event in the south of the country will be different to the north or whatever, not particularly picking on the north-south divide, but wherever you go, events will always be different. And the events, the tournament organizer, the events manager, whatever, will always want to put a different twist or a different slant on their event, which they absolutely should. You should not go to an event somewhere and it's exact duplicate somewhere else, because that would be really, really boring. However, I know from personal experience, if I wasn't involved in the channel, I would probably play maybe 20 or 30 games of Heresy a year. So I'm really limited for the amount of time. Before I started the channel, I had loads of stuff going on, lots of bits and bobs, and I can only devote so much time to go into events. I could play at my local club, sure, but those games with a friend at a club is very different to an event. So you have to bear in mind, people that are going to events, they go to very few, and because the organizer wants to make their events so unique and so different, the events are really hard to follow. So I've been to quite a few in the last year. Some are a lot easier to play than the others, but there's lots of all these effects going on and environmental effects, and there's a special rule here, and what happened on table 4 influenced table 12, and table 4 is at turn 3 and table 6 is at turn 1, and it's too much. I'm a real simple guy, right? And whether that's a detriment to my character, I don't know, but I can only really singularly focus on one specific thing. So when you get all this onslaught of information, you've got to remember your rules, you've got to remember your opponent's rules, although you shouldn't have to, but it's good to have a working knowledge of your enemy, because there are stuff that gets through. Channel is no exception, happens here as well. So to remember all those different things, it's really hard. And really, all I want to do is go to an event, to a new town I've not been to before, socialise with some guys that are into the same thing that I'm into, and play a game. To then have all of these extra bits and bobs on top, it's an absolute overload of information. So I'm not saying having all these things is a bad thing. It's great. But for your average gamer, which I consider myself to be, it's a lot going on and it's too much. And invariably, what happens is you get to your opponent, the TO's had his thing, we're doing this, X, Y, Z, table 4, table 6, table 10, whatever. You get to your opponent and you go, should we just play in a game of Heresy? And they go, yeah. And that's happened to, I would say, probably 60% of my games at events that I've been to. I think narrative events are great, and they do a fantastic job at telling a very particular story. But I think sometimes there's too much going on, and they're just so hard to get that story at the end. I might be wrong on that, and that's my personal opinion. That will not stop me from going to events at all, but it might just say, oh, let's just play a game of Heresy played for 6 weeks.
I think it mirrors. I think what's very interesting about that is it mirrors other game systems. Like we had Mike on who talked about Blood Bowl, and I'm like, Mike, how do events change? He's like, they don't. Every event the same. Everything's the same. End of conversation. Thousands of people play a day, and I'm like, sweet. Like, whereas you're looking at Age of Sigmar, the events are pretty much the same, with occasionally a couple of distinctions. I think variety is good in those ways, but really what people tend to fuck around with is the secondaries. That's it. 40k. Oh boy, you got the chapter approved missions, then you got ITC, and then you got WTC. And so those are three varying systems. You've got team structures as well for those setups as well. So I can completely understand what you mean, because for me, one of the greatest bits about, and I know you said that we talk about Age of Sigmar a lot, and I do, because I don't think it's the best game system, but I think one of the things that it's arguable it's not the case now, is it's got the least barriers to entry. There's an
Okay.
app that's free with all the free rules for all of the war scrolls, so then you only need to buy the battle tomes, right? If you want additional stuff, the battle plans are are in a book, and then you're done. That's it. You got to learn nothing else, and you're playing. Barrier to entry for playing ITC 40k is I need to learn 40k. I need to own 8 books for that army. I then need to go and learn what ITC is, and then need to play the Heresy though for events. Here's my question: how, if I'm new, do I start getting into wanting to play? Obviously, watch your video.
Of course, that'd be the first thing to do, right? I think Heresy is really hard to get into, and I hate to say that, because I don't think any game system should be hard to get into, but it is. I think one, you've got the cost of the models. I think that is definitely a high price, but you have to bear in mind that, you know, this is a luxury hobby, and I'm not moaning about prices because I've paid them for the last 10, 15 years of my life. You know, that's not a whinge at all. But I do think Games Workshop Forge World can help that a little bit more, and we saw that initially with the Betrayal of Calth and the Burning of Prospero box sets. Those box sets were unbelievable, and there was no doubt that the people picking up Heresy or moving from other game systems to Heresy had a massive boost because of those box sets. Now, you know, and you will see this conversation on Facebook every single day of the week. You can go to any forum and or any chat, and this will come up. You know, Heresy needs more plastic models to get more people into the game, because I think once they're there and they've brought their Betrayal of Calth and a couple of vehicles, they are deep in the Heresy, and it's really hard to get out of because of the storyline and all those things I've talked about. You know, what we need is we need plastic Spartans, and we need plastic Rhinos as a minimum, and then we need a plastic Sikaran chassis, and then with all the options of the turrets on top. That's what we need to get. We'll never get the equivalent numbers of 40k or Age of Sigmar into Heresy. We won't, but it will certainly help.
I got to say that I don't necessarily agree. Could I and number one, you're the one who's been doing it, so fuck me for even countermanding you.
Go for it.
No, but I would like to bring up one of the things that's been said in the chat, specifically by Warmaster. He says that it seems like it's just Marines versus Marines, and that's where people fall down, because from a visual perspective, when you don't know about the game, you're correct, but actually. That couldn't be any closer, any more different. So yeah, there might be 20 legionaries on the board, but that special character has got an entire fucking book that you've read about him, or maybe several, yeah. And so his inclusion on the board is a narrative masterstroke that you're enacting, and sometimes you're trying to play as much as that guy, or you're not. And I think as time goes on, so I'm just bringing up. The fact that I think it's actually more vivid than it looks when you first see it. There's so much. The narrative informs the game so much more than people realise. And while I think Age of Sigmar's simplicity into getting into is the best, I think its narrative is the weakest. And therefore, when I'm informed about my game through the story, the Heresy is the fucking tippity top of Big Ben's cock in that situation. It's just the best for doing that. It makes me so much more involved. So, and as people get more into the story, and I know the Horus Heresy as books is even more daunting, but it can't be generations away that we're going to see a TV series or something, right? Or something, you know.
Maybe. Let me pick up on your viewer's comment there. I totally 100% agree with him. When I started off in Heresy, I went, "Oh, it's just Marines on Marines. That is really boring." And that's why I went to Mechanicum, because they were just a complete sea change from Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV armor. I was not interested in Space Marines whatsoever. However, after being involved in the channel and seeing Heresy as a wider thing, and then starting to read the first 3 books, I went, holy hell, it's not just Space Marines and Space Marines, because and I think this is where Heresy falls down by itself, if I'm honest with you. A lot of people will peg certain legions in certain battlefield roles. If you're an Iron Warriors player, you've got artillery and you've got to bring walls down. If you're an Imperial Fist player, you've got to stand behind a fortification and fire your bolter out. If you're a Night Lords player, you've got to go and attack people and hack people up, and you've got to have a drop assault list. Now, yes, that is true, and that is really fluffy with those particular armies, and they have a particular deference to those styles of army. But every single legion had every single bit of equipment available to them. You can run